Aloha mai kako. You are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
Hawaii Political Reporter is not owned, influenced, or an agent of corporate, government, or special interest. We are a local, honest, independent source of political news and commentary. Our primary goals are to promote awareness of the non-aggression principle and to reduce violence, war, and death. To promote economic liberty, prosperity, and true civil rights as in the U.S. Constitution. To promote transparency and to bring awareness of corruption in government and the collusion at all levels with big-moneyed individuals and special interests to deprive the people of true choice of government, government that is truly by and for the people, for prosperity and freedom.
Nobody is listening to your telephone calls.
I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president.
He's a traitor. There's no American who's going to be snooped on in any way.
For somebody to tell the American people the truth is a heroic effort.
You can't have 100% privacy, and I think that's good.
So essentially there is no Fourth Amendment anymore.
You know, I'm embarrassed. I am not embarrassed.
Over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who's simply hired by the government.
And
I have more to say, but I'm saying too much already.
Even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded.
so I want to be very clear.
When you have a dictatorship or an authoritarian government, truth becomes treasonous.
I think he's a traitor.
An American hero.
This guy is a traitor.
He should be heralded as a hero.
There is still a thing called execution.
If they want to get you, they'll get you in time. And that's a fear I'll live under for the rest of my life, however long that happens to be.
Welcome to the Maui Liberty Network. I'm Joe Kent of the Maui Libertarian Party, and our co-host is Valerie Cisneros of Tea Party Maui. And with us today we have Phil Heath of the Libertarian Party and Pat Brock, who is also part of the Libertarian Party. And today we're talking about the top 10 worst laws on Maui that hurt business. We talked to business people from all over Maui and try to get their story. You talked to a lot of business people as well. And so Valerie made a list and I made a list, and we tried to, with mathemagics and wizardry, we made a top 10 list. And so this is the ultimate top 10 list of laws that hurt business on Maui. By the way, if you think of an item that we didn't hit on our list, so please feel free to visit us at MauiLibertyNetwork.com, and we can try to add it to the show. With that said, on with the list. This is the Maui Liberty Network's top 10 worst laws that hurt business. Number 10 is licensing and permitting laws. When you think about all the different people on Maui that have to get licenses in order to do anything, the list goes on and on. We're going to put the list on your screen right now. Childcare workers, teachers, massage therapists, bicycle tours, private detectives, activity desks, hearing aid fitters, restaurants, timeshare salespeople, travel agencies, and the list goes on and on and on. Some of these licenses take years and years to obtain. But the argument is that if people aren't licensed, then there's going to be bad actors. There's going to be people who give a bad massage. There's going to be a restaurant that doesn't do business right just because they don't have a license. Don't we need licenses?
There's bad actors in every single industry that I've worked. There's also great and there's great actors as well. The great ones get more business through word of mouth, through the internet, and through positive praise. I tell friends about I had a great meal at this restaurant, so I go back there. If I had a bad meal, I don't recommend it anymore. So there's a lot of these licensing laws do not necessarily, they have, all the restaurants are licensed to operate in the business, but doesn't mean they have great food or great service.
So you're saying that if I wanted to go to a massage therapist who was unlicensed and they gave me a bad massage, then obviously I wouldn't go there again.
You wouldn't go there again. If they gave you a bad massage, you probably would say, I would recommend that you avoid that massage therapist.
Right.
I would go somewhere else.
And is there any kind of licensing in the free market? In other words, isn't there some cases where we need licenses, and how would the free market deal with that?
Libertarians have advocated private certification organizations where people could contract to be tested and graded by the certification, some sort of a private certification board.
Like underwater laboratory, UL, on all the electric.
That's an excellent example, yeah. And so people could check with private certification organizations and find out how service providers or product providers rate among their peers.
Okay. Is there any other licenses that you can think of around Maui, or just a funny licensing law?
Yeah, I was talking to a commercial fisherman recently in my neighborhood, and I thought it was really amazing just how many things that he has to go through just to be able to catch fish for the local restaurants. And I didn't realize that a fisherman has to have a commercial license, for fishing license to fish, and then you have to have another license to drive the boat. And then if you want to go bottom fishing, you have to have a different license. And then if you need to fish near Kaho'olawe, you need a different license. And they must report how many fish they catch. And if this goes to the DLNR and the state aquatic resources. And if they're bottom fishing, they can't bring along like their son or their grandfather or anything unless the son or grandfather has also a license to bottom fish.
Really? So a dad and a son want to go fishing. The son's just coming along for the ride. He's not doing any fishing, and you need 2 licenses.
Yes.
To go. Oh, wow.
Of course, if no one sees you fishing, that's no problem. But if someone does, they can be penalized and fined, and licenses can be revoked, and then he can lose his license and not be able to make a living.
It reminds me of something that Lawrence Carnicelli once told me, which is that if something is, if you need a license for something, that means it's illegal to do it naturally. So it's illegal to fish, it's illegal to drive, it's illegal to do business with anyone unless you get a license. And so basically everything's illegal today. And we've got all these licenses to sort of make us feel like we're living free, when really we're not as free as we think. So,
also with licensing, we have the strictest requirements for licensing than anywhere else in the 50 states. So the restrictions that the state puts on it are higher than every other state in the union.
I didn't know that.
There's another aspect to licensing that I've noticed in Hawaii, particularly building contractors. It's not enough to pay the fee and prove that you know your job. You also have to spend an internship or an apprenticeship with somebody who's already in the business, and you have to get a signature from them, a validation from them to get the license to compete with them. So it's kind of a conflict of interest there.
Even if you've been in that same industry, licensed contractor in another state, there's no reciprocity between states.
Well, that brings us to our number 9 item on the list. And here is, okay, so now number 9. Okay, number 9 on our list is building permits. If anyone wants to build a building, alter a building, make changes to a building that already exists, they need to get a building permit. These building permits can take months and months, sometimes years to obtain. I knew, actually yesterday I just talked to a contractor who was just trying to renovate a house. And the owner of the house said he wanted to put a screen door on the house. Well, in order to put that one screen door up, it took 6 months to wait for this building permit. And the building permit sat in the building department's office for a long time. He called, sometimes they'd be on vacation. And in the meantime, his competitors were skirting the law. They would just try to do business without getting the permits, and they get all the customers. And so the only way to make it in the system is to be a criminal. Now, the guy I talked to, he said he had it, he'd done this for 27 years, and he was at his last straw, and I have a feeling there's a lot of people like that. The argument about building permits is that, well, then someone's going to build a building that's bad. What sort of arguments do you have against that?
I sort of wonder myself, when I first moved here almost 20 years ago, I guess there weren't quite so many of these permits and necessary. You saw the houses didn't match. You drive through any neighborhood and everyone has a house that looks however they want their house to look. And I just don't see a big problem with that. I mean, now where I come from, and so many places on the mainland, all the houses look exactly the same. I often wonder how people find their houses at night, especially if they've had a few cocktails or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't really quite understand. I'm sure it's I'm sure it's for our own good and our own safety, because that's usually the way. That's always the rationale, since we're mostly treated like kindergartners, and the government needs to protect us at all turns.
But when it comes to building permits, actually they're very closely related to zoning laws as well, because it depends on where you're zoned, what building permits you need to follow. If you buy land that's on the ocean side of the road, watch out, because that land is called SMA land, or shoreline management area land. That land has about 10 times more restrictions and regulations that you have to follow when it comes to building permits. So this screen door thing would only happen on an SMA land property. All this stuff does is raise the price of buildings and raise the price of
your
land and
your rent, your housing.
Contributes to homelessness.
Yeah.
Oh, I never thought about that.
The Cato Institute that did a study that they estimated that at least nationwide, about 40% of housing costs go to meeting regulations and covering permit fees and things like that.
I know an individual who he thought he was following the law. He read all the building permits, he read all the licensing, he thought he was following the law to the letter. And then he realized that he was on SMA land, which was closer to the ocean, and he was subject to a whole host of different laws. So when he found that out, he realized that he had a rock wall that was 6 feet high when the requirement on the SMA land was 5 feet high. And so he said, well, I'll just take some of the rocks off. But no, he was fined about $60,000 just for that rock wall. It was this kind of thing happens all the time. Sign laws. A sign has to be smaller on SMA land. There's all sorts of kind of weird laws when it comes to where your business can be and where your shed can be and all this stuff.
And the size of your home, if you want to build a tiny home, you're not allowed to under the county rules right now.
Oh, really?
Yes, you can't. I have friends of mine on this island that want to build a small shack, small to live in, because it's more affordable and you can actually afford to build it. But county has restrictions on that as of today.
You know what all this stuff reminds me of is that our property isn't really our property. When it comes to property rights, you actually don't own your property. It's the government that owns it, and you're borrowing it from them. Mm-hmm. So if you own something on your land, you should be able to do what you want on that land, as long as you're not polluting someone else's land or polluting someone else's air, you should be able to do what you want on your own property. And that obviously is the libertarian philosophy standpoint of that. So.
I agree. There was one business owner I spoke with, they're building a new building, and they had to stop construction. They were almost done, and then they had to stop because they didn't have a water fountain built in this building. And so they had to send their plans back to the architect and get it redone so they could go back and put in water fountains, because we all need water fountains, right?
Yeah, I kind of wonder, there's a lot of run-down buildings on Maui. You kind of think, well, why are they run down? Why don't they just update it? And then you realize that, oh, yeah, it's because it takes forever to do that. So it's easier to just ignore it. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. And that brings us to number 8.
1 second.
Oh, okay. All right, number 8. Is it 8? Are we at 8 already?
Unions, yeah.
Number 8 is, I put the National Labor Relations Act. Don't turn your channel. Don't touch that dial. It's not as boring as it sounds. The National Labor Relations Act is a law that basically says businesses aren't allowed to discriminate against unions. And you think, well, businesses shouldn't discriminate anyways. But I think they should be allowed to discriminate when it comes to unions. For example, let's pretend that I have a business and someone applies at my business and they give me the application and I read it and it says, I want to work at your company and I want to start a union at your company and I want to organize everyone in your company to start a union. And obviously as a business owner, I think, well, that's going to hurt my business. So I'm just going to throw their application in the trash. Well, what this law says is if you ignore that application, it's actually against the law. And there's been many cases where these people have sued the business for not hiring them. It's illegal to fire someone just because they're part of a union. And what this law does is it gives unions power. And I think if the law was abolished, then businesses would have the freedom to hire and fire who they want, whether they're in a union or not, and then the free market would take over. So I think that unions are one of the biggest hurtful things to business, and this is the one law that keeps them all in place. Now, yeah.
Aren't you forced to be in a union, Joe?
I am forced to be in a union. In Hawaii, I'm part of the teachers union, and I sit in the meetings and I pay the fees, and I never elected to be in this union, but I'm still part of it. So, yeah.
It certainly seems like companies ought to have the choice. They could sign a contract with the union and have a ready-made workforce, probably trained, well-trained, and ready to go, or choose to hire everyone individually and train them themselves. It would seem that either way would be a possible way for a company to go.
Do you think that if this law were abolished, that there would be no more unions?
I wouldn't think so. Like the United Auto Workers. I mean, once again, if you open an auto factory and you want to start making cars, if you go to the United Auto Workers, they ought to be able to supply you with a workforce that's already been tested and trained and get started right away.
Okay, so there'd be kind of free market unions, and if the union wanted to all do a walkout, they could, and the business could negotiate with them or not, or
before this law was passed, unions had the ability and the right to go on strike immediately and not have to give 30 days notice.
That's interesting.
So it cuts a little bit both ways, but it cuts both ways. There's restrictions on them that they don't have right now, that they had before.
Well, all I know is unions hurt business, and when you think about all the unions in Hawaii, there's the shipping union, construction union, medical union, teachers union. It goes on and on. Just think about all the business that's lost to union activity. So, Number 8 was unions. Okay. Number 7, if you're just tuning in, this is the Maui Liberty Network. We're talking about the top 10 worst laws that hurt business in Hawaii, and now we're on to number 7. Number 7 is welfare and unemployment. You know, Hawaii has the highest welfare in the nation. Have you heard that before? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it also has the highest unemployment payout. Well, not the highest, it actually has among the highest unemployment payouts as well. You talk about welfare. If you're a single mother of 2, you can make almost $50,000 a year in Hawaii. That's more than I make. That's more than probably a lot of us make. And when it costs, when you get more money when you don't work, then obviously it's going to stop people from trying to find a job.
They don't have an incentive. Why would they? Why, you know, there's a lot of people who don't mind having somebody else to pay for all their expenses, and if they get enough to pay their rent, it kills the person's incentive. They become dependent on somebody else to take care of them, which is very, very dangerous.
Well, obviously the argument to it, though, is that, well, who's going to help the poor? So who's going to help the poor?
You're not helping the poor by having them being dependent on welfare for the rest of their lives. How is that helping the poor?
That's a good point. And I think that the best, if you're talking about what is the best system to help the poor, is free market capitalism and job creation. And if people aren't looking for jobs, then they're not creating jobs. So, so anyways, that's my number 7, welfare. Number 6 is the Public Utilities Commission. Have you ever wondered why your electric bill is so high, or why you run out of water, why there's a drought in water? Things like this have to do with the Public Utilities Commission. Basically, it's public utilities. So the phone lines, the water lines, the sewage lines, the transportation, I guess, avenues, electric lines, all these things, anything that has to do with lines, I guess, is you've got the Public Utilities Commission, infrastructure. So why does this hurt business? Well, if you've ever looked at your electricity bill, you know why. It costs a lot of money to run any kind of energy on Maui. If you've got a business based on energy, look out. The same thing with water and even telecommunications. And it used to be that the Public Utilities Commission regulated the phone lines so that there was a monopoly in the phone lines. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And now that's changed.
It has changed. But there's an interesting thing that the federal government now forces the phone companies, like Hawaiian Tel, is forced to sell to allow other companies, their direct competition, to use their facilities and sell it at a cheaper rate. So there's a few other companies that use their facilities. They set up in Hawaiian Tel's central office, and they set up their equipment, and the government mandates that those companies can sell their product cheaper than Hawaiian Tel or whoever the main company is. And I think that's just not...
I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of like the government sees that there's value in a free market system, so then it does a top-down version of value and says, you businesses have to act like free market. Mm-hmm. And even if the free market would never do that, right? You have to pretend like you're free market actors, and so you have to allow them to go in your building and they can use your things and so on. But in the free market, it happens naturally.
They had a monopoly to begin with, so they're I guess overcompensating for that fact. I don't know if it's better or not, but I think it's it's not the right way to do it. But I understand why they did it that way. But there are better ways to do it than that.
I mean, the argument is that, well, who would run the buses? Who would run the transportation? Who would run the electricity?
Speaking of buses, when I was in Mexico, buses run every single minute in Cancun. I didn't have to wait more than a minute to catch a bus. It costs about $1 to catch the bus. It take me into town. Here, if I miss the bus and you got to wait another hour for that bus to come back. So I like there was about 50 companies that were operating bus. Each bus driver had their own bus company.
Free market buses.
Yes.
And here they're subsidized, right?
They are subsidized.
Yeah.
Yes.
The buses here. The
I'm
bus,
not
the bus system. The bus system.
Oh, right, yeah. I
is
mean,
subsidized.
the public bus system is millions of dollars in the hole every year, and they subsidize it. And yeah, so the argument is, well, if we don't have the government creating these utility monopolies, then everything's going to go to pieces. But it reminds me of something Murray Rothbard once said, which is that if the shoe industry were run by the government, right, and for all our lives, the shoe industry, governments made shoes, then if we were to privatize shoes, then we'd say, well, how would it work? Who would sell the shoes? Who would make the shoes? Where would they be made? Where would they be sold? Who would buy the shoes? And the only answer that you'd be able to give is, well, the free market would handle it. And that's kind of what we have to say when it comes to these public utilities. But by the same token, we have to remember that everyone loves their shoes, and they buy the shoes they want at the price that they're willing to pay. And there's no shortage of shoes out there, but there is a shortage of water, and there's a shortage of, have you ever heard of a brownout or a blackout? I mean, there's shortages of electricity all the time. All this stuff has to do with the Public Utilities Commission, and I believe it could be gotten rid of, and business would be better for it.
Number 5 that I'd like to talk about is the Liquor Commission. So I've spent a little time interviewing some small business people, and I spent quite a bit of time with someone that runs a local bar restaurant, and I was so amazed with all of the little Menini laws that they have, and I'm sure I only heard like the tiniest little section of what they have, but so I'm going to start with this.
Okay.
The Liquor Commission is a county board, and it consists of about a dozen people, and there are about 10 liquor control officers on Maui, and they stop and check on things randomly and often. So a bar owner must have a permit to have a dance floor, and the dance floor must be a minimum of 10 by 10. There is no alcohol allowed on the dance floor, and no one is allowed to dance outside of the confines of the dance floor, and no drinks are allowed in the bathroom because someone underage might actually drink in the bathroom. You can't allow glass in the bathroom because someone might break a glass in the bathroom. Again, it's the kindergarten mentality. They have requirements that the bartenders have to use approved jiggers with certain sizes, so there's no just pouring directly out of a bottle, or you see in some movies where there's all these theatrics of
right, okay, yeah.
That's not allowed. They have to use approved jiggers, or they'll be fined. You cannot pour straight from the bottle to the glass, and it's illegal to infuse alcohol with fruit or cinnamon sticks or anything like that. They consider that manufacturing alcohol, and that is not allowed. And then a bar owner only gets 3 points, I guess, for the life of the business. And if these points are taken away, a business can be closed. Fines, it appears, are pretty arbitrary. And the one thing I thought was the most amazing is that a bar owner must have security at, say, front door, back door, side door, and by the dance floor to make sure nobody goes on with the drink, and by the bathroom to make sure nobody goes into the men's room, and one by the ladies' room to make sure no one goes into the ladies' room. And so this security costs the bar owner, say, around $20 an hour per person, and they pay, say, 4 to 7 hours a night. So anytime that there's live music, or any music, even recorded music, they need to make sure that someone is watching so they can comply with all of these rules so that they don't get their licenses revoked. And the band members are not allowed to have any drinks on the bar either. And when the kitchen is open...
But it was given up in the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express.
You try a hide and destroy a freedom, man. You seek agenda, we know you anti-American. You come forward American Constitution. 1913, corrupt up in the system. Devalue dollar, hyperinflation. The Federal Reserve, controlled by Lisa Farr. He can see you lying